Well, good morning there, everybody. It is May 9th, 2020. It's snowing. Yep. And we're just going to sip to that. No, but for real, it seems like everything's just getting crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier. We've been in a pandemic for what feels like months now. I mean, it literally has been months. I think what I meant for hyperbole is I was going to say years as opposed to months. But we've definitely been in a pandemic for months, and yeah, things just seem to be getting crazier. And I feel like I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to hit a point of I don't know LIGAF, which is an acronym LIGAF, and it stands for like I give a. And I'm not sure how I feel about the fact that that's kind of the attitude that I'm starting to feel towards everything. I feel very disconnected from what's going on with the world around me. I feel very disconnected from what's going on down the street from me. I just feel very disconnected from feeling anything in regards to this. And I'm not sure if it's because I've been exposed to it for so long now that maybe I'm becoming a little desensitized, or maybe it's due to the fact that I just don't know how to process all this. But that being said, there's still an overarching feeling of hope. And I read something really phenomenal last night, and I wish I had actually saved it or copy pasted it so that way I could share it with you guys this morning verbatim. But I'm going to go ahead and try and paraphrase it. And the way it started out, it was a conversation two people were having, and one person says to the others, I don't understand how you can be positive all the time, how you can be so happy. And the other person looks at them and says, well, it's because I'm not. What you're seeing is I have just as much fear, anxiety, and depressive episodes as anyone else. But what I find is that when faced with the choice of whether to let those things overcome and consume, or whether to be the light that is burning bright, I choose the light. And the reason I choose the light, even though I may be feeling this way, these terrible things, these awful things, is that I know in my heart of hearts that if I can inspire, if I can promote, or if I can get just one other person to feel better because I feel good, well, then that makes it all worth it. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but it was really beautifully written, and I'm going to try and find it again after the show wraps up. And when I upload this onto YouTube, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to paste it right into the description for anybody who's curious, because it was very cool. It was very eye-opening for me. Good morning, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. See, we got a few people watching. Good morning to the rest of y'all, folks. But anyways, I hope you guys are doing really well today. I hope that you find yourselves healthy. I hope you find yourselves happy. And I hope that everything is just good. Despite what's going on just outside our windows, I hope everything in your headspace, everything within your four walls is good. So what we're going to be doing today, I guess first we're going to pet this puppy dog who's very insistent that he needs attention. So we're going to take care of that real quick. Yes, I know. He's very mistreated here. So mistreated. Good morning, Mindy. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, you are. All right. So, for those of you who tuned in last week, or if you caught the show after I uploaded it, we were working on some fascia release techniques, and I had introduced you guys to my little friend, the lacrosse ball. So, what we're going to be doing today, I've been noticing that my right shoulder's been getting kind of tight again. I'm feeling, just kind of cranky, not really cooperating with me. So I'm going to, for my fascia lesson today, actually work on the shoulder area, and I'm going to kind of show you guys where I'm going to be aiming and what the actual technique is for opening these muscles up. Now, of course, as a disclaimer before I start, I do want to remind you guys that if you've never done fascia release techniques, or if you're very new to this concept, don't start with a lacrosse ball. It's a very rigid and dense object. It does have a little bit of give to it, which is good. You want that. But I would recommend starting yourself with either a tennis ball or a racquetball. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be laying down on the floor, and you're not going to be able to see what it is that I am doing exactly. So right now I'm going to kind of outline for you. When I'm laying down, I'm going to be taking the lacrosse ball and starting below my shoulder blade, I'm going to be moving it around and across all the soft tissues of my back, up in between my spine and my shoulder blade, and bringing it out through the upper back and trapezius muscles. Now, while I'm doing that, when I get to every specific area, again with this ball, I'm going to be using flossing techniques. I'm going to be activating, stretching, and moving the muscle tissue while it is under pressure from this ball. So very similar to when you would go and get a deep tissue massage, I'm going to be pinning down and holding the tissue of the muscle, the fascia, and I'm going to be stretching and moving it through that tension to try and loosen it up a bit and just really convince the central nervous system to ease up, to let go. Now, of course, this is Saturday morning coffee, so before we start that, that's good. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm first going to position the ball where I want it. And of course, by doing that, it's not going to go exactly where I wanted it first. So it's going to take me a second. But what I'm going to do is, now that it's on the ground and I'm on the ball, I'm just going to kind of shimmy and move my back a bit. Oh, there we go. Till I get it in the position that I'm looking for. So now my next step is, I'm going to take a little bit of time, just kind of breathe normal and naturally, and I want to let my body adjust to the sensation of what I'm feeling. Right now there's a lot of pressure pushing on my back muscles, very mid-lowish back, and I can feel that pressure kind of pushing up into my rib cage, and it's creating a very uncomfortable sensation for my body. It's actually kind of putting it into a little bit of a stress response. So I do want to give it just a minute to relax, let the central nervous system recognize that I'm not doing anything that's going to cause it harm, and it doesn't need to, be in this heightened, stressful state. So actually, I'm already starting to feel those nervous twitches starting to subside. My breathing's becoming a little bit more relaxed, and that initial jolt of discomfort that I felt is starting to become just kind of like a dull pressure. So good, now we're there. So what I'm going to start with is I'm first going to set my shoulder blade. To do that, I'm going to start kind of reaching down my body. Oh, there we go. And now as I pull that down, those muscles that the ball is sitting on are going to start to contract themselves through where I've created that pressure point. Now that I've got them kind of set in position, I'm going to start to reach up and really fully extend everything from that point. Now, as I'm reaching my arm up overhead, I'm trying to keep in mind that the leverage point is just below my shoulder blade. So I'm being very conscious to try and hold the weight of my arm in my mid-back, where that's all going down, and not trying to hold it up with the front of my shoulder or too much in my tricep muscle. Now, I'm moving very slow because as I'm going, now you can't see this, but I can feel this, I'm hitting what we would consider knots. I'm hitting points in the tissue where the tissue's a little bit stressed out and not cleanly going through that pressure point. But as I slow down and go through the movement, what happens is the central nervous system starts to relax and it lets that tissue move back into a more pliable state. Now, fortunately, I've been doing this for a while, so it doesn't take long for my central nervous system and my muscles to respond to each other and relax and loosen up. Now, when you're first starting to do work like this, you can do what's called the floss technique. I mean, what I am doing is the floss technique, but you can do it a little bit more systematically. So once you kind of find that spot, you can work yourself into those areas and just kind of focus on trying to floss the muscle back and forth through that pressure point and zone. Now, I'd say yeah, look at that. Everything's nice and opened up, shoulder blades gliding along the back, serratus muscles good and active right here, and my arm's just kind of dangling and hanging, and I can actually pretty much cleanly bring it back to the floor, and I'm laying on a ball. So we've now opened up that part of the back. So now I'm going to start moving that lacrosse ball a little bit higher up, right in between where my shoulder blade and my spine are. Ooh, and right where the top part, well, the bottom part of the top trapezius muscle kind of wraps over and connects. This is traditionally where I carry a lot of tension in my right shoulder. For anybody who's been following me for a while, my right shoulder tends to ride up into my neck. Unfortunately, it's just automatic movement patterns from a very long life of just moving my right shoulder improperly, holding my hand on top of the steering wheel, and just kind of keeping my shoulder up inside my neck, bad sleeping patterns, bad sitting patterns, just a whole mess of things. Unfortunately, it's gotten a lot better since I've become very aware of it, and I've been spending the last few years really working on and honing my skills and making sure that I practice better movements for the shoulder and not strength training with so many poor movements, which unfortunately, if you have very poor movement quality, yeah, strength training with poor movement quality is just going to make all of your issues that much worse. So learn from my mistakes before you make your own. We're just going to kind of do the same thing. We're trying to floss that tight tissue through those dense points. Now, the other movement besides the up and down that I've been showing you that also tends to work really well is the across motion. So that's when I'm going to try and pull my shoulder all the way around my rib cage and really elongate those muscles going from the center of the spine out. Ooh, yeah, actually that just worked really quickly. Then you can kind of do a combination of up and down while you're also stretching across. Because remember, the shoulder joint moves in a very fun way. First off, you've got the head of the humerus lodged into its fitting, and then you have this blade, and the blade is connected to the front of your rib cage. Wait, it's in the back, but it's connected to the front. So it's a very interesting joint in how it articulates and connects to your body, and then the fact that it glides around, up, down. We can do pronation, retraction. There's lots of fun things we can do with our shoulder blade. Oh, there we go. So now I've finally gotten through the upper mid back, and now I'm kind of locked up into my trap muscle. And now what we're going to start to do is I'm going to start to work the tension out the shoulder. So I'm actually going to reach my arm out a little bit so I can get that tension right where I want it. Oh, yep. I'm going to start that reach across to get the shoulder pushed out into the right position. I can feel the tension where I want it. And now I'm going to slowly start to drag my body this way so the tension gets pulled that way across the ball. I'm going to use my hips, my feet to just kind of pull my body across the floor. Oh. Using micro adjustments by shifting my shoulder blade up and down as needed to help guide and move the tension where the spots are sore. here we go. Oh, moving out. Oh, that feels so much better. Woo. Oh, wow. Whew. And now, no more cranky shoulder. Fantastic. Oh. Hey, Anthony, thanks for joining us this morning. It's really a pleasure to have you. Actually, I'm going to ask you this on live video feed. I would love for one morning, if you'd be interested, to join us for Coffee with the Ferret via live satellite feed. I think it'd be great to have you on and pick your brain on some fun fitness topics. Of course, you're not going to hear what I just said for like 20, 30 seconds. So remember, we are on a delay here, which is great. So if I say anything horrific, I have time to bleep it out with the soundboard that I don't have. All right, now that we've got that shoulder kind of opened up, a lot less cranky, what I want to do next is I want to start to open up the thoracic cavity a little bit more. And my focus today is I'm going to teach you guys how to really get some of your back muscles fired up and activated, especially with all the sitting that we've been doing lately and considering how much human beings just live in this anterior plane. Our back muscles tend to get neglected, very, very neglected. So unfortunately, before the gyms went on lockdown, I left my favorite thoracic opening tool there. Now, fortunately though, foam rollers work really well, and almost every single person has one, so you don't have to worry about being ill-equipped for what I'm about to show you next. So we're going to put our foam roller down on the ground, and we're going to scoot ourselves just a little bit in front of it. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to lean myself back, and I'm going to start at right about my mid-back. I'm going to try to make sure my spine is in a relatively straight, neutral position. And I'm going to keep my hips glued to the floor. Now that I've got that, I'm going to fully exhale. And after I finish the exhale, I'm going to start to stretch and open and reach over my head to extend my spine. Whew, I don't know if you guys heard that pop. That was a good one. Now, one of the reasons why I'm fully exhaling, letting all the air out of my lungs, is that is going to really help me create a tight vacuum seal and keep my abdominal muscles good and braced to help me protect my spine as I'm going into extension and using a tool such as this to assist me. As you're doing stuff like this, remember, start off slow. Don't try to, go for broke. Ease your way into it, all right? So now that I did that spot at the low part of my mid-back, I'm going to move the roller up a bit, and I'm scooting myself down. And the next thing is we're just going to keep working our way up the spine like a segment. Now, a lot of people, especially if you sit at a desk for long periods of time, or if you tend to find yourself always constantly looking down at your cell phone, you're going to have very, very tight muscles in your upper back. They're going to be very stretched out and mostly useless to you. And you may have what we view as a slightly hump back. Now, an exercise like this, coupled with other things, will help you start to bring all that kind of back into alignment with the way you want it to be. But the reason we're going through the process of really making sure we can get these open and active is that when we actually start doing the exercises to activate our back, we want to make sure that we're staying out of our neck muscles while we're doing this, because we don't want to exacerbate any issues or problems that we may already have. Woo! All right. Spine's feeling good. Fantastic. Hi, Dottie. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. All right. I'm gonna throw all y'all some likes real quick. Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us this morning. Taking the time out of your busy Saturdays with all your snow. God, I love coffee. All right. So now that we've got all that nice and opened up, now I'm going to take you through some of my favorite activation drills for getting those back muscles primed up and fired. So you're going to want a floor surface that you don't mind laying down on. The first thing we're going to do, we're just going to get ourselves antiquated with the back muscles. Because one thing that I find is a lot of times when you ask people to lift their arms over their head while they're laying down, or if they're against a bench or something like that, they always tend to like to lift their shoulders right through here. When in reality, we're aiming for something a little bit more here. We want to be pulling down on our shoulder blades into our back. So I want you to feel those muscles before we start trying to work over our head. So we're going to keep our palms facing the ceiling, and I want you to pretend that there are little tiny hands on your shoulder blades, and the fingertips of those hands are pointed up to the ceiling. Now what you're going to do is you're going to try and raise those hands on the flats of your shoulder blades up towards the ceiling. Now you'll know you're doing this right if you start to feel those muscles in the mid-back, around and along the shoulder blade, activating and pulling up. You're in the wrong area if you feel a lot of tension building in your trap muscle. If you feel a lot of tension building in your tricep muscle, that's going to be an indicator to you that you're utilizing the wrong part of the chain to try and create the lift. So using those sensations, recognizing that you can feel your neck, your trap, you can feel your tricep, try to shut them off by focusing on them and pulling tension away from them until you can feel your shoulder blades still lifting towards the ceiling, but not being activated by those muscles. So it's probably going to take you a while at first, just practicing, engaging and pulling back on the shoulder blades. But once you start to have a pretty good handle on it, then you can start to do things like making circles, pulling back up towards the ceiling, shrugging up towards your ears, dropping them back down towards the ground without letting tension out, reaching back towards your heels, lifting again towards the ceiling while reaching down towards your heels. And now that we've done one full circle that direction, we're going to go backwards. So we'll reach up towards the ceiling, pull back towards our heels again, scoop down towards the floor gently, making sure we don't let all the tension out, shrug up, and pull back, up, and down again. So something like that, after being done a few times, you're going to start to feel the muscles around your shoulder blade getting pretty warm. You're going to feel a lot of blood starting to fill up in those areas, and you're going to feel like they're getting pretty active. Once the mid-back has been fully activated and you've kind of loosened up the upper part of your spine, that's when you can start moving into things that are a little bit more complicated, like the IYT raise, which is simply setting yourself into an I position. Again, focusing on those mid-back muscles, pulling down on your shoulder blades towards your spine to create that lift. Then moving to a Y position. Again, trying to pull your shoulder blades down and in to create that lift. Then finally moving to the T. Again, still creating that downward motion of the shoulder blade. Now, you'll notice my thumbs are pointed up towards the ceiling. I find that rotating the arm bones in that direction while first learning this drill is a really good way to make sure you're getting that appropriate rotation down into the back. But you can also play around with the thumb position flat to the ground and pointing down to the ground. And that can also play a part in how you're going to feel activation going on. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with me while we did that little backtivation drill. It looks like we've already chewed up quite a bit of time with all that, but that's okay. That's okay. So that means we're going to get into our chat topics for today. Now, what we're going to be talking about today has a little bit of personal connotation for me, and as well as a little bit of personal connotation for me from my past. It also has a lot of connotation to what everyone is really experiencing right now. And while we all are not in the same boat, we are all inside the same storm. We are all weathering the same storm. And as such, knowing that we're not literally in the same boat, or metaphorically, we have to be able to understand that people's experiences with this, how they react, how they don't react, what they choose to do, what they don't choose to do, is going to be entirely subjective to the individual. And you can't hold your lens to somebody else, especially not with what's going on right now. And if you think you can hold your lens to somebody else, and if you try to hold your lens to somebody else, I'm going to tell you right now, you're wrong, and you need to stop that crap, okay? This experience is very subjective. Yes, we are all going through this together, but how it is affecting us is 100% to the individual. So, with that in mind, use that to help you be a little bit more empathetic to someone you may not agree with, or decisions people are making that you may not necessarily agree with. There's a lot of very interesting debates going on through our country right now with just that. And, well, I can tell you one of the reasons I'm not an elected official is because I wouldn't want to make one of these tough decisions. That's why we vote. That's why we put people in positions of power. Because when the metaphorical poo does hit the metaphorical fan, we look to them to make those hard decisions that nobody wants to make, that nobody should realistically have to make, except in these dire situations and circumstances. So, what we're going to be talking about today are the very real concepts of depression and anxiety. Now, everyone, every human being, every animal too, experiences depression and anxiety. Some of us experience it in a much more acute fashion. Some of us experience it in a much more dull fashion. Some of us experience it in waves, as peaks and valleys. There is no wrong way to experience these things. There is no right way to experience these things. Diving into anxiety real quick, what I want you to understand is that anxiety is not inherently a bad thing. Anxiety is one of the driving forces of our evolution, of our response to our environments, and how our body shifts and changes on a cellular and molecular level as it needs to. For example, when you're in the gym and you're pumping that heavy iron, you are actually experiencing a form of anxiety. You are creating stress hormone within your body by breaking down muscle tissue in little microscopic bits and pieces. And you are fatiguing your central nervous system with adrenaline. That is, by all definitions and purposes, anxiety. Now, you can also be stuck at the top of a hill in your car without four-wheel drive in the middle of a snowstorm, dreading moving down it. And as you start driving down that hill, your pulse starts to quicken, you start to cold sweat, your focus becomes laser-like, and you almost start to hyperventilate. That too is also a form of anxiety. Or let's say it's time to get out of bed, and all you can think about is just how you're going to disappoint everyone. That too is a form of anxiety. So what we can see is that this broadly covers a lot of different things, and it isn't something that we need to necessarily be afraid of. We need to understand it, and we need to recognize that anxiety is a part of being human. And everyone is going to experience different levels of it. It's going to affect them in different scenarios, circumstances, and situations. Now, depression, on the other hand, the more automated and easy life gets, the more we have an opportunity to not be mindlessly busy, the more we are going to be susceptible to experiencing depression. As weird as it is to say, there's some wisdom, probably not the right word for what I'm trying to convey for a point here, but there's some truth to be found in some very old sayings and slogans about how working, just working with your hands, doing something, being busy, doesn't give you time to be depressed. It doesn't give you time to feel your anxiety. Once upon a time, from sun up to sundown, I mean, life was about survival and struggle. And as we've evolved as a species, we've found ways to make life more and more automated. We've found ways to make it easier. We've found ways to allow people within society to pursue hobbies, to expand upon the arts and the sciences and the things that aren't directly related to our survival on a day-to-day basis. And with that, we've also created downtime. We've also created void space. Now, everyone is trying to fill void space. I don't care who you are. Everyone is trying to fill void space. Whether you fill that with a hobby, whether you fill that with volunteering your time, whether you fill that with drugs or alcohol or video games or something that is either constructive or self-destructive, we are all trying to fill the void space. So I need you to understand that, because now we're going to kind of jump into talking about addiction. Now, I'd be willing to bet that everyone out there has either at least one person in their life, whether it's a family member, a friend, or someone that they were acquainted with, maybe not super close with, but they knew of, was a member of their society, that they know whom was addicted to something. And they probably know this person as knows their addiction as something that was very destructive to their life. And that is a very real thing that does happen to quite a bit of people. And unfortunately, the less experience we have dealing with that, the less experience we have with people who deal with that, the easier it is to dismiss it as being a very real thing or a very human thing. It's very easy to say to somebody who's suffering from alcoholism, like, oh, well, why don't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Why don't you just stop? Why don't you just choose not to do that? Addiction does not work like that. Addiction does not care what you think. Addiction does not care what you feel. Addiction is a chemical, a mental, a emotional response to a stimulus that fills your void space. It is directly related to the dopamine in our own brains, which are our happy drugs and our happy chemicals. And any single person, every one of you, everyone you know, can become addicted to something. Now, that being said, you've got people who can use very addictive substances and never find themselves chemically, emotionally, or mentally dependent. And that's true. That's very real. Then you have people who are very susceptible, who can utilize those things just once, and then that's it. That starts, a very long and painful journey for them. But the thing to understand is there's nothing fundamentally different between those two people. The only thing is in one of them, the switch flipped, and in the other, it didn't. Now, the other thing you need to understand about that is your genes, your genetics, will either give you a lot of yes flags or a lot of no flags. Now, the more yes flags you have, the easier it is for that switch to flip. The fewer yes flags you have, the more difficult it can be to flip, but it can still flip just like that. Um, so in knowing that and understanding that, recognize that a person, a human being dealing and struggling with addiction is just that. They are a human being, a person, and they are no different than you. And their switch just got flipped. Now, I do want to emphasize that being an addict, having an addiction, does not excuse any of your behaviors. It is not an excuse for doing crappy things and being a crappy person. It is a reason to understand, but it is not an excuse. So I do want to draw a very clear, definitive line there. Whenever I've had to deal with a family member or a friend who is an addict, I recognize and understand they are a human being. And just like any other human being, they need love, they need loyalty, they need somebody to be in their corner. But they don't get a free pass. You don't get to be a crappy person just because you're an addict. Because again, like I already said, anyone can be an addict. That doesn't make anything special about you. But we do need to recognize that it isn't something that they can just turn off. And unfortunately, for anybody who has recovered, they'll know this very, very wholeheartedly. Even after you've recovered, you don't ever get rid of that itch. It's always going to exist. There's always going to be things, cues, either visual or olfactory or sound or something will cause a trigger and a cue. And suddenly your brain's going to start to get flooded with that dopamine again. But if you have recovered, what you've found is you've found the willpower and the desire that there is something greater for you than the dopamine you get from fulfilling that addiction and filling that void. A lot of times people will fill that void space with other things to, kind of make it so there isn't room for that addiction. So let's kind of go into the topic of self-medication, especially with everything that's going on right now and the fact that, depression is definitely on the rise. Human beings are very social creatures. We are not designed to be islands. Actually, I think Ernest Hemingway said it very great. No man is an island. And what he meant by that is exactly this. Isolation does not do good things to the human spirit, to the human psyche. It's one of the reasons why solitary confinement is a relatively taboo and or severe punishment to give to inmates, particularly dangerous ones or not so dangerous, depending. But isolating a human being from a pack, from a tribe, from society, it is literally the worst thing you can do to a person. And now with all of this forced isolation, fortunately, some of us are blessed to be in an isolated situation where we have some very close confidants. And we're also very fortunate that we have technology that does allow us to still connect with the outside world to a degree, to an extent. Nothing's ever going to replace that in-person communication and energy. But at least we have ways of kind of dampening the pangs of this isolation that we're being forced into. Now, with isolation comes heightened depression. With heightened depression comes more desire to fill the void space. And with a lot of us being out of work, there is a lot more void space to fill. So this is where the dangers of self-medicating come in. Here in America, we have some very legal and very fun ways to self-medicate. Our alcohol industry is absolutely booming. It always does during a depression, recession, and or pandemic because we love to self-medicate. We love to fill the void space. So a lot of people will fill that void space with alcohol. On the other side of that coin, we have fought long and hard, and finally the government gave up and said, fine. And now we have legalized marijuana. There's another thing that we can absolutely fill the void space with. Now, of course, we could argue back and forth. which one of those two substances is more damaging, which one of those two substances, leads to addiction and all that other stuff. But we're not going to have that debate. We're not going to have that argument. All we're going to simply discuss is that everyone is trying to fill the void space, and we've got stuff at our disposal to self-medicate on. Another thing we can self-medicate on. We can binge on television and consume media. We can self-medicate by disconnecting even further from the rest of the world and getting lost in a game in the world of video games. Now, recognize again that we're all trying to fill that void space. Recognize that there is a lot of void space currently. And be aware, because I don't want you to not do these things. I mean, you're an adult. You're a human being. You should be allowed to live your life. You should be allowed to enjoy the things that you want to enjoy without, somebody standing over your shoulder and being like, I mean, hell, I have a beer with dinner. Sometimes I have multiple beers after dinner. Sometimes I'll spark up, and sometimes I'll absolutely get myself lost in a great video game for a while. What falls on us is recognizing when, where, and how much of this to consume. How much of the void space do we want to fill with mindless and or mind-altering substances and activities? Because just like anything, too much of anything is bad. And anything that causes a positive influence on your dopamine receptors has the ability to flip the addiction switch. Yes, you can absolutely get addicted to video games. You can start to constantly seek out filling the void space with video games. You can disconnect completely from the world. I mean, alcohol and marijuana, those obviously are givens. I mean, but people don't necessarily think of other things like what they do as far as their consumption of media or playing video games, that too can become a certain kind of addiction. So the note I want to leave you guys on today, is to recognize that depression and anxiety are a very human thing. Try and have more empathy towards your fellow human being. Recognize that an addict can't just choose to turn off what's going on. Be empathetical, but also don't excuse their piss poor behavior, because I mean, you wouldn't tolerate that behavior from somebody who wasn't an addict. You also should not tolerate it from somebody who is an addict. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the issue comes in with them not being able to see clearly what's going on. And you do have to recognize that at some point you do have to walk away from those situations, because you either find yourself enabling, or you're being taken advantage of, or you are just exhausting your own emotional resources. So the next takeaway is to remember, with all that, we're in a heightened era of depression and anxiety, and everyone's going to have a lot more void space to fill. Be wise with the activities you choose to fill your void space with, and remember that you can choose other activities that may not necessarily be along the lines of self-medicating, but don't not enjoy yourself. So thanks again for joining me on this wonderful Saturday morning, having a little bit of a deep chat on things that are going on. I know I said I was going to get into a pretty personal level today, but you know what? I've talked about it in so many other episodes and videos of things that I've done before. You guys don't need to hear my story all over again, as far as addiction and stimulants and depressants and all that fun stuff is considered. So just know that I have experience with it. I know what I'm talking about from a personal perspective. I have experience with family going through it. I have experience with really close friends also going through it. Does that make me an expert? No, not at all. Does that make me somebody who has been around it a lot? Yes, absolutely. Does that mean that I may have some insight that you don't? Possibly. I mean, that's life. Subjective insight. You can take what I'm saying and you can try and apply it in an applicable way to your own lens of truth, or you can call it fake news, and that's that. So I'm going to leave the floor open for about 60 seconds. If anybody's got any questions, if there's any topics you'd like to discuss, and we do have a few more minutes, I'd be more than happy to field those questions. Health, fitness, nutrition, mental health, um, things of that nature, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, guys, and I hope you will join us next week for another Saturday morning coffee. I know this week's topic was kind of depressive, so I think next week we're gonna focus on something a little bit happier. We're gonna focus on something a little bit more bubbly, a little bit more fun to interact with. Don't know what that is yet, but I'll figure it out. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.